Very well. Well, Mr. Murillo, welcome to tonight's session with the Agri-Business Incubator. You'll notice that more people are going to be joining us as we go along the session. And we hope to get everyone joining by at least the next 5 or so minutes. But we'll get started now with your presentation. And so I want to welcome you and I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight, as this is one of the most important sessions that we have for our incubatees. As you would know, we are in the incubation process of the Technical Cooperation Program between the FAO and the government of Belize through the Ministry of Training these incubatees on how to enhance their businesses. And we're hoping that sessions like these can help them to explore other avenues and to get them acquainted with how business is done formally. So very well, welcome and thank you again. And I hand it over to you.
Well, good evening, Silverio and participants. And I have to say thank you for the invitation to make this presentation. If I could do a brief introduction of myself, I am Gareth Murillo. In my substantive post, I am the Registrar of Cooperatives in the Department of Cooperatives. However, back in 2019, the government of Belize embarked on a project to introduce contract farming legislation and regulations here in Belize. That project, it was a technical cooperation project undertaken with the assistance of FAO. I was at that point, at that time, appointed as the focal point for that particular project. Hence, Silverio's extending the invitation to me to make this presentation. I have been the one who has preserved the documentation and the experience gathered during that particular exercise. FAO had 3 consultants who came in and made a physical visit to Belize, where they engaged with various agriculture industry stakeholders, just doing some research and looking at what contractual relationships that we had here in Belize. And they were also looking at ways how we could improve and formalize those relationships through legislation. Unfortunately, this occurred in October of 2019, and unfortunately, COVID-19 set in shortly thereafter, and we had to complete the exercise virtually. However, it was completed, and at this point in time, we also have the drafting notes, the drafting instructions for the enactment of legislation governing contract farming here in Belize. Our challenge is that there is no substantive agriculture legislation with which we could tie the contract farming legislation to. And so we are exploring concepts and ideas to see if we can just do it as a standalone legislation. And so with that said, I would just like to begin the presentation at this moment. So Silverio, am I able to share my screen?
Mr. Murillo, you can go right ahead.
Okay, great. Great. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, excellent. And so for this evening's exercise, I have entitled this presentation, the Principles and Guidelines for Responsible Contract Farming. As I have already done my introduction, my presentation will be divided into 3 parts. I will begin with an overview of contract farming, what it is, why it is, and how it is supposed to operate. I will then follow that up with a look at a model agreement as was developed by FAO. I will speak to you with regards to the contents of the model agreement and why those particular sections are there. Before I conclude with a look at some form of negotiations and how you can engage in your negotiations with your buyers. And so we say that contract farming, what is contract farming? At the heart, it is an agreement between producers and buyers in which both parties agree in advance on the terms and conditions for the production and marketing of farm products. It usually includes the price to be paid, quantity and quality demanded, and delivery dates. We say that the contract may also include information on terms on how the production will be carried out, or if any inputs will be provided. And those inputs may include seeds, fertilizers, financial assistance, technical advice, and other support services. Now, it is not a new concept. It has been in existence for decades. However, in recent years, its use has increased in popularity, particularly in developing countries such as ours. Businesses that resell and process products are particularly interested in contracting with farmers in order to secure a regular supply that meets their needs in terms of quality and quantity. Contract farming, can help to connect smallholder farmers to buyers. It will give you as small producers, as small farmers, the possibility of knowing in advance when, to whom, and at what price you will sell your products. This helps you to reduce the unpredictability of agriculture, and it should allow you to better plan your production. It even reduces the risks associated with fluctuating prices, and it should help to protect small farmers and producers against losses associated with natural disasters, climate change, as these are risks that are shared with the buyer under the terms of the contract. When the buyers also provide access to inputs, contract farming can lead to significant increases in yields and in profits. So now, why contract farming? There have been some recent transformations in agri-food systems. These have created new technical requirements, compliance costs that make it increasingly difficult for resource-poor farmers to access the modern market channels. There have also been some demographic changes. I think it is obvious even here that there is a rapid urbanization and that certain rising living standards have required increased food quantities. This increase has led to some scientific, technological developments, which in turn have significantly contributed to changes in market demand, the operation of supply chains, and the production of raw commodities. I divert a little bit to look at what have been some of those recent transformations in agri-food systems. We all note that there is trade in high-value food products, that trade is growing, that consumers are now increasingly aware of food quality and food safety issues. And there is the role of food labels, standards, and certification systems. That role is growing. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to participate in a virtual forum of the Global Food Safety Initiative, where they were speaking and they were talking about the need to have certain particular standards, particularly if you are looking to go to export markets. They have certain certifications. They spoke about global GAP, global GAP. They spoke about BRC. They spoke about packaging and packaging standards. It spoke about labels and labeling standards. And all of those things are becoming more and more important. And the idea is that where there are small producers who may not necessarily be able to access and afford such services or such certification standards, that then contract farming may be able to allow them to meet and be able to provide products meeting those standards. As I said, when we go back now to speaking about why contract farming, we have seen its increase in popularity, particularly in developing countries. Globalization has brought the world closer together, and the demand for food and agricultural products has increased dramatically. Food markets are more competitive as consumers in many countries now live in cities and demand food products that are not only safe to eat, but are also produced in ways that do not damage or harm the environment or harm workers involved in their production. You know, in this new context, the buyers of agricultural products need to work more closely with their partners in the supply chain so that they can source enough good quality raw materials directly from farmers and producers to meet the demand for food products. They have their own customers, the supermarkets, the restaurants, the hotels, schools, and hospitals. We look now at certain advantages, disadvantages for both producers and farmers and for the buyers. When we speak of advantages, and we will speak to the matter of the farmers and the producers first, the advantages are that there is an easier access to inputs, to services, and to credit. Here in Belize, our financial markets are not yet so developed where you can take a contract into a financial institution, into a bank, or into a credit union and use that contract as collateral to access capital. But we believe that once the legislation is enacted and we do some education with the financial institutions, that we should be able to advance and to move to that other level where it is now then easier to access capital. We see another advantage is improved production and management skills. If your buyer is providing you with technical assistance, then it is expected that that assistance will be at a higher level than what you are able to do for yourselves. Another advantage is that you have a secure market. Your buyer signs a contract with you that he is going to buy X amount of products from you at Y prices at Z time. That is secure. You know, there is no need to be out running around, standing on the roadside, trying to put your products in a supermarket somewhere. No, your buyer has already established that market for you, and it is a secure market. And of course, with a secure market comes a more stable income. When we look though at disadvantages, and there are some disadvantages for farmers. You sign a contract to provide that product to that particular buyer, then you lose that flexibility to sell to an alternative buyer if there is a price increase in the market. You have already committed yourself to that particular buyer, and so you must honor the provisions of the contract and sell to that buyer at that agreed upon price. Another disadvantage is possible delays in payments and the late delivery of inputs. Again, though, this would have mostly to do with the trustworthiness of your buyer, and it involves knowing your buyer, which I will speak a little bit on when I talk about negotiations later on in the presentation. There is also the risk of indebtedness from loans provided by the buyer. Of course, as I said earlier, if your buyer is providing finances, then you run a risk of becoming indebted to your buyer. There are also certain environmental risks. We all know about climate change. We have all experienced issues with climate change. And if you are just growing one crop, or if you are just manufacturing one product, then you run certain environmental risks. And of course, there is always the matter of unequal bargaining power between farmers and buyers. Typically, our farmers tend to be grassroots people, typically less educated, whilst your buyer are more of a business mindset and looking to turn a profit at any opportunity they can obtain. The buyers also do have certain advantages. They will always have a consistent supply. They make that contract with you. You are expected to honor that contract, so they are ensured of a consistent supply of whatever product you are to provide. They also ensure that those products that they procure or acquire from you conform to the quality and safety standards as set out in the contract. There is for them reduced input and labor costs, as is when that is compared to them setting up a company or to produce those particular products. The disadvantages for buyers is that there are some high transaction costs from doing contracts with many small farmers and with many producers. And this is where farmer and producer organizations such as associations, cooperatives, and partnerships come in that your buyer will sign one contract with a cooperative of maybe 15 to 18 persons rather than be doing 15 to 18 contracts with each individual. Another disadvantage for the buyers is that there is the risk of side selling if the farmers decide to break the contract and sell to others. I spoke to that disadvantage for the farmers of the loss of flexibility to sell to alternative buyers. But we all know that in this world, we are not all honest people, and there are some unscrupulous people who would be engaged in what is referred to as side selling, whereby if I am a buyer and I assist you with finances, with inputs, when you do have your product, you still attempt to sell some on the side, outside of our contractual agreements. Of course, there is the issue of potential misuse of inputs. If the farmers use the seeds and the fertilizers provided by the buyer, not only for another purpose, but if they use them incorrectly and against whatever technical advice is given. As a buyer, that buyer may also lose the flexibility to seek an alternative supply. He has committed to you as his supplier, and if you are unable to meet his needs, then he is still tied to that contract. So even if he sees a better product out there, then he would need to engage with who is producing that better product and do another contract. And in attempting to break your contract, he may incur some penalties. And of course, there is the matter of reputational risks if things do not work out, not just between the producer and the buyer, but if the product is not of a particular quality standard that is demanded by the market. And so that concludes the overview of the what and the why. Are you guys hearing me well?
Yes, Mr. Morio,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, I just saw a notification of poor network quality, hence my question. Okay, so now I will speak to the model agreement. Now there are several important global principles and guidelines that exist, that have been drafted, that have been developed to help governments, agribusinesses, producers, farmers, civil society organizations improve the governance of agriculture and food systems. There is the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, forests, and fisheries of the Committee on World Food Security. There is the CFS principles for responsible investment in agriculture and food systems. There is the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains. And then there is the UNIDROIT, which is the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law, and FAO and IFA, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. They collaborated on a legal guide on contract farming. that is referred to as the legal guide. This is the copy of that particular document. It is a very detailed publication. You can find it online. It describes common contract farming terms. It discusses the legal issues and problems that commonly arise, and it illustrates how these can be addressed in different legal systems. It also established the frameworks of the FAO model agreement. So this is the model agreement which was used while the consultants and while we were engaged in our project back in 2019. And this is the model agreement for responsible contract farming. It is a detailed but a simple and practical legal tool aligned with drawing on the legal guide, and it offers example language to operationalize the principles as elaborated in the guide. It provides simplified model provisions that can be used and customized by the parties, but it must be adapted to the specific context and a legal system. Of course, that document is designed to address some of the inequalities in farming that disadvantage producers. It seeks to help create a more equitable and sustainable business relationships, as well as a transparent business environment for contract farming schemes. It is designed to ensure that the producer is paid a fair price for their goods in a timely manner. Hence the reason why it is called responsible contract farming. It seeks to create strong incentives on both sides to respect the terms of the agreement and build trust between the parties. It is not, though, a one-size-fits-all blueprint. It must be adapted to the realities of the specific commodity, the local context, and domestic legal system, and be supported by each party's independent legal advice. All right, so what that means is that I can't take a contract that was written for, let's say, habaneros, and I just copy and paste it into a contract for tomatoes. You know, it does not work that way. Or I copy and paste it into a contract for the provision of beef or pork. It must be adapted to each specific commodity. So now I want to look at the contents of the model agreement, and it is divided into 12 sections. And those 12 sections, the typical model agreement begins with the parties, the buyer, the seller, and that section includes the name and address of the signatories. The second part spells out the purpose of the contract. The purpose, that is, providing the reason for the contract, including the name of the specific commodity to be produced. Part 3 will deal with the production site. The production site is where the size and if it's a farm, it is where the size and location of the farming area should be, and that information must be specified in as much detail as possible. If it is a factory or some other manufacturing plant, then that must also be specified. Where it is land, and that land is leased or is rented, it is not owned by the producer or by the farmer who is signing the contract, then there must be evidence of land use agreements, and sometimes that the owner's approval, who owns the owner of the land, his approval may be required. Part 4 has to do with the obligations of the parties. This describes what the farmer or what the producer is expected to produce, how it should be delivered, what support the buyer is required to provide. If the buyer is to provide inputs, technical assistance, finances, then this may be included here or in a different section immediately thereafter. One of the most important sections is at number 5, which is price and payment. This should be to explain the price to be paid, how it will be calculated, as well as when, where, and how payment will take place. Section 6 has to do with input provision, and this must include a specific description of the inputs to be provided by the buyer, and when and where they will be delivered, and how repayment by the producer will be calculated and made. If there is to be no input provision from the buyer, then this section can be eliminated, this section can be deleted, and you would then be left with an 11 section contract. Part 7 has to do, or section 7 would have to do with third parties. I just spoke on the matter of the production site, where it may be required for a landowner to be included. That landowner may be regarded then as a third party. But third parties describe the relationship with others who may contribute to the contract success. Of course, third parties may also include financial institutions, or, as I was speaking about before, the quality assurance certification bodies. All right, maybe the buyer would want to have the product certified, and so he may wish to include that in the contract as well. He may wish to have those certification bodies also provide some technical advice to the producer to ensure that the finished product is of that particular quality standard. At section 8, there is the matter of excuses. There is a legal term called force majeure, but in trying to keep the document as simple as possible and to make it as understandable as possible for farmers and small producers, the term excuses is used. Of course, in the clause there is still that Latin term force majeure, but the excuses are there to define an acceptable justification for failing to comply with the contract, and it can that is to be included in that section. During the workshops that were held at the project phase, there were some questions as to what would be certain legitimate excuses. And of course, we always speak about climate change, we speak about natural disasters. If you are to produce, let's say, for example, a certain crop, you sign a contract during the processes of production and before you can harvest. God forbids there is a hurricane and your field is wiped out, then there is no way you can deliver, and so that would qualify as an excuse. If there is a forest fire, then that would qualify as an excuse. If it can also happen on the part of the buyer. Let's say the buyer is a factory and they're buying tomatoes from a particular farmer or producer, just for example, to make ketchup, to make salsa casera. And again, similarly, there is a natural disaster, there is a hurricane that comes and destroys the factory, or there is a fire that destroys the factory. Then there is no way that buyer will still buy those tomatoes, as his factory is not able to process them. And so those would come then as legitimate excuse and accents of force majeure. Following excuses at section 9, there is of course remedies. Every excuse there has to be a remedy, and these remedies include descriptions of the ways in which either party can be compensated for the failure of the other to meet their obligations. In the case of where it is the factory that is unable to meet its obligation, then a part of the remedy may be that the farmer or the producer is then able to sell that product to a third party, to another buyer. without any penalties to be faced under this particular contract. If it is the farmer that is unable to produce, then the buyer may then say, I will go and acquire my product from another producer without having to face any penalty under this contract. Those would be regarded as remedies. In as much as is possible, we seek to not go into financial damages as it relates to these remedies. Then at section 10, there is a matter of duration, renewal, and termination. This particular section gives the details of how long the contract is for, any arrangements for extension or renewal, and how and why it can be ended. Typically and globally, if it is for agricultural products and agricultural produce, contracts are usually for one crop season, and always then with the option of renewing come the next season and the following season. Termination, of course, that is in any particular contract, whether it is for agriculture or not, and that and matters for termination or issues related to termination can be where you, the farmer, or you, the producer, believe that you will not be able to meet the demand or the obligations of the contract. Then you can seek to terminate that contract. Of course, that termination, then there are certain clauses that says that you can terminate within a certain period. That matter for termination is not open. You cannot wait until a week or two before the delivery date to say then that you wish to terminate the contract. No, that would not be responsible. And so that is not necessarily allowed or written into contracts. It is a short window between the signing of the contract to when you can seek to terminate it shortly thereafter. Of course, at section 11, in any issue where there are more than two, or where there are two and more parties, there is always the potential for dispute. And so that is taken into consideration where section 11 deals with dispute resolution. And this section introduces ways of addressing potential disagreements between buyers and farmers. And the last section at section 12 is where the signatories, where the signatures go, where each party should sign. This should be ideally in the presence of witnesses. And so that concludes the model agreement. I want to speak a bit now before I conclude on the matter of negotiations. And I think this is a particularly interesting area because as you would have noted, I mentioned before that there is certain unequal power between small producers and large companies. They are able to afford and hire legal teams, business management expertise, which we as small producers and as small farmers would not necessarily have access to. And so I will begin with a little brief with regards to business negotiation. And we say that business negotiation, that it is a process between two or more parties, each with its own aims, needs, and viewpoints, by which compromise or agreement is reached while avoiding argument and dispute. Certain key words there, that it is a process between two or more parties with compromise and agreement while avoiding argument and dispute. We now look at contract negotiation. Contract negotiation is a predetermined approach or a prepared plan or action to achieve, with the help of the best negotiation strategies, a specific goal or objective to potentially find and make an agreement or contract in a negotiation with another party or parties. Again, some keywords: predetermined or prepared plan of action, strategies to make an agreement. Right? So those are very important, that you must be prepared with a predetermined approach or plan of action with certain strategies aimed at arriving at an agreement or a contract. So in the negotiation phase, the buyer, and this is typical, the buyer would provide the offer to farmers, which outlines the conditions of the contract. So for example, and I am going to use I'm going to use Murray Sharp's habanero. We have engaged with them in terms of doing some of having contractual arrangements with hot pepper farmers down in the Stan Creek district, and hence why I'm using them in this particular example. They have their particular, it is not necessarily a formal standard, but they have certain quality conditions and requirements. They look for peppers of a certain size, of a certain color, and of a certain weight, and so it would be then that they would provide that information to the farmers. And so that would outline certain quality criteria. And then they would say, look, we need you to produce peppers of this particular quality for this particular date, and we will pay this particular price. As we said, typically, usually, this offer should be presented to the farmers in writing, with time allowed for them to review the document, to give them enough time to understand the proposed conditions, and if needed, that they can consult with advisors for support. The producer or the farmer then needs to understand very well all the conditions they are about to agree to. Always be prepared to ask questions and request changes to certain clauses related to pricing, quality, payment, product delivery, if they seem unfair, if they seem too hard, or if they seem impossible to meet, to achieve. The signing of the contract should only take place after a full agreement on all the conditions has been reached and the negotiation phase is completed. Under general contract law, once the written offer has been accepted, this is then sufficient to form a legally binding contract. I now want to take a quick look at some negotiation strategies to help you all going forward, just some ideas which you can use if you are to engage in contractual arrangements with buyers. As I said before, you have to look at the matter of planning and preparation. And so what is entailed in that planning and preparation? You need to have information related to market intelligence, market data. What is the demand for the particular product or commodity that you have for sale, that you are offering? Who are your competitors? You need to know your cost of production, your cost of operation, so that then that will give you a baseline of the lowest price that you can take while still making a profit. None of you are in business just to break even, just to pay the bills. You are in business to make a profit, to generate wealth for yourselves. And so that matter of the cost of production or the cost of operation is important so that you know then what is the value of your produce or of your product, and what is the minimum that you will take for it. It also helps if you have some background information on your buyer. What have been their relationships before with other producers? What is their place in the market? Are they regarded as honest and open and upfront business people? Do they have a large customer base? Are they known for their increasing sales? You know, all of that information is what you need to take into consideration as you do your planning and as you do your preparation. The second point, in terms of some negotiation strategy, is going there with some confidence. You know, be ready to explain and to say how your product stands out from the other competitors. What makes your product better than theirs? We always say, and as the topic says, responsible contract farming. Be honest, be upfront, explain yourselves clearly, and of course, make your offer. The third issue in terms of the strategy is to close the deal. Of course, as we said, you know, there may be some back and forth. Find a win-win. At some point, you know, you have to come to an agreement where the buyer believes he has won, you, the producer, believe you have won, and that is where you close the deal. Of course, in terms of the negotiations, as I said, usually the offer is made in writing. Even when the offer is in writing, during the course of the discussions and the negotiations, take some notes, have them ready. In certain particular instances, if it is for an association or for a cooperative, they may have a couple of persons who are appointed to go into those negotiations, as all the members would not be able to be there. It is always good to take notes that you can bring back to the other people in your enterprise so that you can relate to them the discussions as they happened, and you can face questions from them. Remember, you are all in this enterprise, in this association or this cooperative together. And of course, review. When you have your notes, review your notes, review the contract. As I stated, you are able to seek advice, whether you are able to afford that legal advice to go to a lawyer or to some legal institution, or you may seek advice from ourselves in the government departments and in the Ministry of Agriculture. Always feel free to seek out our advice. We are here to help you. I found this little slide. I found this little poster, and I made sure to include that portion of it that says that it is from J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, and it spoke to the matter of doing deals, and it said discover. D is for discover. Know everything you can about the deal, your motivation and theirs. E is for establish. You establish a number of things before. That speaks to the planning and the preparation. So you establish your priorities, your boundaries, your breaking points. A is for ask. Try to go first to avoid being overly influenced by the first proposal. L is for lead. Stay in control. Be the driver and present in a calm and influential way. As I said, have that confidence. S is for seal. As I said, close the deal. Seal the future of the deal. Make sure the other party feels satisfied. As I said, win-win. For more information, there is a website called the FAO Contract Farming Resource Center. That is the address. I can copy and paste it into the chat when I'm finished with the presentation, which in fact I am finished at the moment. And so I would say thank you. I hope you learned something from this presentation today. And if you have questions, comments, feedback, I am here to listen and to try to respond. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so at this moment, the floor is open for any questions. Colleagues, feel free to open your mics and ask whatever inquiry you might have. at this time.
Yeah, we
Good
can
night.
hear you, Mr. Silverio.
I think, Silveria, you were breaking up a bit there.
Okay, okay. No, I was just saying, can you hear me now?
Hi, good night. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearer than I am, Silveria.
Go ahead, Roberto, you can ask your question.
Mr. Roberto, go ahead.
Yes, my question was the following concerning the scenario you mentioned based on the risk. I know you mentioned that there is a risk between even if it's the producer, the farmer, or the buyer, and if there is a hazard or natural disaster. My question would be if in the scenario that you mentioned, if the factory, let's say, it's producing salsa casera or ketchup, if something happens to the um to the factory, what would the farmer do if he has a loan or has to do payments, and if the factory won't be able to buy the produce?
Yeah, excellent question. Typically, the first remedy would be that then the farmer is able to sell that produce to whomever he can find who is willing to buy. He is able to, for want of a better term, break with the obligations of the contract, given his own financial obligations, and then be allowed to sell that produce to another, to a third, to a fourth, or to another buyer, somebody who can afford and who is willing to take it off his hands. And that is even if that original buyer had provided some inputs. So if that original buyer had provided some inputs, but he is now unable to buy that product from the farmer, then that farmer is allowed to sell it to another party.
Okay, so it automatically releases the contract that the
Exactly.
agreements that the two parties had.
Exactly. It releases the farmer from that agreement, yes, if that buyer is unable to honor his end of the contract.
Okay. I have a next. Well, it's more like a comment, no? And it's something I would say is like a stigma. I remember when I was growing up, being a young kid. I remember my father had a very bad experience, and sometimes I think it's farmers, young farmers or young farmers get frightened to do contract farming with other companies or big companies because my grandfather, I remember, he made agreements with Mary Sharp at that time. Mary Sharp agreed that she was going to buy all the peppers that were produced, but actually at the time, Mary Sharp just back off, and when the production was at its peak, and then she didn't want it to buy the peppers, and I think farmers sometimes have really bad experience on these types of agreements and contracts.
You are so right. Those were a lot of the comments that came up when we were doing the project. Even to now, in terms of our engagement with the farming community, many farmers are reluctant to sign contracts. But concurrently, you also have many producers who are reluctant to have contracts with farmers as well. And so it goes both ways. But I think that a part of what we here in Belize may be missing is the fact that the food systems globally is changing. And it is with those changes now that have caused many other developing countries to have gone to this issue of doing contract farming. There is a school of thought, and this was expressed by a gentleman, I think, who was the guest speaker at the Agriculture and Trade Show back in 2019. There is a school of thought that says a farmer or a farmer should not put a seed in the ground, or a producer should not manufacture a commodity unless he knows where he will sell it. Right? So there is that school of thought, and the only way then that you can do that as a farmer or as a producer is with a contract. But to try and allay some of the concerns in the proposed legislation that we have, there would be a person who would be appointed as an agricultural contract officer. That person would be some officer sitting in the Ministry of Agriculture. All farming contracts would have to be reviewed and lodged with that individual, so that he or she should meet with both buyer, both farmer, and ensure that what is in the contract is agreed upon by both parties. He will keep a record of those contracts. He or she is then to assist in terms of the dispute resolution, in terms of the application of remedies. It would not be a scenario where it is left only up to the producer or to the buyer to adjudicate on the terms of the contract, so it would not be a situation, as you described, where a buyer can just at the last minute walk away, or vice versa, at the last minute a farmer can just walk away. There would have to be some excuse, there would have to be some remedies, there would have to be some penalties for such matters that occurred. We know, we heard it during the discussions, we heard it during the deliberations, that farmers have that issue. As it was not necessarily, the consultations were not necessarily just in a conference room. We actually took the time to visit the farming communities with the FAO consultants, and as you speak, or as we spoke to the farmers and we said, would you do a contract? The first reaction was, and then there was that pause, so we know that there is that stigma. And for me, it is more than a stigma. It has actually been history. It has been fact, where we have had some negative experiences in the past. And so what we are doing right now in trying to formalize and in trying to regularize and putting in place certain legislation is to seek to ensure that issues like that are minimized, and that those don't become the norm, as has been in the past.
Okay, so you're saying that you guys would be the regulatory body that would be regulating, or the officer that you mentioned would be regulating the contract-based agreements between the producers and the buyers.
That is correct. At this point, I am unable to share the legislation, the drafting instructions with you, but I can tell you that there are provisions there where there will be a contract farming officer who will have an office and who will keep a registry and who will maintain the records of all agricultural contracts. And then there is to be somebody who will be a mediator, or an adjudicator. It can be that same particular officer who will be responsible for looking at those remedies or looking at the matter of the imposition of penalties. Of course, those penalties would have to be included in the original contract.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Murillo.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions or comments from the floor?
Yes, I have, Mr. Murillo. I have a question. Does it applies the same rule on the virgin countries too? Like for exporting?
Oh, if you can do a contract with a foreign buyer,
Yes,
is that the
and
question?
yes, and the same rule applies on it, or have to check about on their laws.
Yeah, it would have to be a combination. Um, if the buyer is acquiring something from you here, then he would need to make that contract here in Belize, and he would have to agree to comply with our laws. With our laws. Similarly, though, he may require you to comply with the laws of his country.
Okay, thank you.
My advice there to you, though, would be to ensure that whatever are the obligations as it relates to one law, that it remains the same with the other countries' laws.
Okay, I understand.
Any other questions? Because I'm worried. I'm worried that I was either as clear as daylight or as clear as mud. Which one was it? Just kidding.
No, I think it was quite clear, Mr. Murillo. Any other questions, guys? Yes, Mario, go ahead.
I have a question. Is there a resource like if we wanted some assistance with like legal assistance? Because oftentimes the suppliers abroad are more sophisticated. They have their attorneys. If a farmer needs some legal assistance, is there a resource where that can be, farmers can get help with that?
Unfortunately, at this point in time, no. We are hoping that with the enactment of the legislation then, that and with the establishment of that office of the contract officer, that then they would be able to provide such a service and such an advice, particularly to small producers and small farmers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I believe I have shared in the chat the FAO contract farming, the link to the FAO contract farming resource center that has a lot of the data and the documentation that I spoke about during the presentation. If I may add quickly, and just do a little background as to how this project and this draft legislation came about. Back in 2018, there is a body called the Caribbean Food Crops Society. It comprises both the English and Spanish speaking Caribbean. And apparently they were to have their annual general meeting in Puerto Rico. But if you recall, that was the year that Puerto Rico was hit by the 2 hurricanes. And so they ended up looking for another venue. Belize was not a member of the body. And so they identified Belize as a potential member, and they extended a note to say that they would like to host, or they would like Belize to host their AGM. The government and ministry at the time agreed, and so they had that meeting here. During the course of that meeting, there were several presentations with regards to the agriculture and the food industry. And we saw a couple of presentations. The first was on what the gentleman called a social enterprise that they had set up and established in El Salvador. The purpose of that enterprise was to have more direct links for small farmers and small producers to formal and established markets. And they explained to us the operations. They established this enterprise through a project proposal. They submitted a project proposal to certain international funding agencies, and they were approved, given the social implications, the socioeconomic implications. And so they won the project grant. And if I recall correctly, they got a grant of approximately $1.1 million to establish this social enterprise. Following them, we saw a presentation from a gentleman who was the quality assurance officer for Subway restaurants. He did a presentation with regards to them, that Subway was a customer in El Salvador of this social enterprise. And so they were one of the recipients of that direct linkages of small farmers to markets. This gentleman, who was the quality assurance manager for Subway, we later found out he was a Belizean. He was a naturalized Belizean. He was somebody who came to Belize from, he was a child. I think he said from he was about 1 year or 2 years old, and that in fact his parents still live here in Belize. You know, and through the interactions with him, he got the people in El Salvador from the social enterprise to extend to us an invitation to visit El Salvador and to see their operations. And so we took on that visit in January of 2019. It was a 10-person party that traveled to El Salvador. It was 5 officials, 5 people from the Ministry of Agriculture, and 5 farmers. These farmers were chosen from the productive areas, the productive communities of the country. And so we took a 2-day visit to El Salvador to first look at where the farms were and where the packaging and processing happened. And then the second day, we took a look at their business, their administrative, and their financial operations. And we looked at it. We had the opportunity to speak with the farmers and ask them, you know, is it better for you now than it was before? And the farmers, to a person, said yes. The farming areas that we visited, it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours outside of the capital, San Salvador. And so the farmers explained to us that before they would grow their produce, they would harvest, they would have to take that 1 hour or that 2 hour drive from where the farms were down into the capital to sell whatever they did not sell by about 4 o'clock in the evening. They would either discard or sell it very cheap to take that hour and a half to 2 hour drive back home. But that now they no longer operated in that manner. That because of this enterprise, they were able to now acquire a higher quality of inputs. And so they were able to get higher yields, which they then just delivered to a plant, to a receiving center located within a certain geographic region, which was maybe about 5 miles from where the farms were. They would deliver there, they would collect, they would be paid immediately, minus whatever was the cost of inputs, and they would go about their business. They need not worry about traveling all the way to the capital, about traveling back, and about losing some volume of their produce. And what this social enterprise did was they established a nursery. And so they acquired quality inputs. They employed people to work in that nursery and to produce quality seedlings, which they then provided to the farmers, for those farmers to produce and harvest based on a certain cyclical calendar, based on market demands, not just the matter of timeliness, but also the matter of quality, certain quality specifications. I'm sure you know that Subway brands and markets itself on eating fresh and on having organic food, and so there were certain criteria and certain conditions regarding to the production for Subway. The farmers were also producing for the largest supermarket chain in El Salvador, and so there were those established markets, and there was that criteria and conditions given to them as to how to produce, and this enterprise set out the time frame and the schedule for them. And we looked at that and we said, that's what you would regard as contract farming. But in our discussions with them, they were doing it based on the strength of an MOU. It was just a memorandum of understanding. It was still something in writing, but it was just a memorandum of understanding between the farmer and this enterprise, without taking into consideration the matter of excuses, the matter of remedies, the matter of penalties if something was to go wrong. And we said to ourselves, look, an MOU would not necessarily be applicable in the Belizean culture, in the Belizean scheme of things. We thought that it would be better to do contract farming and establish the regulations and the legislation that would govern such arrangements. And hence, there was this outreach to FAO to come up with this technical cooperation project, which FAO, of course, promptly responded to, and so we engaged in that project back in October of 2019. So you can see the time frame wasn't so long. We were in Salvador in January, seeing what was happening there, and FAO was here in October, working on our legislative framework for contract farming. And we believe that in the grander scheme of things, in terms of food systems, that is the way to go. in order to have small producers have captured markets, while buyers such as supermarkets, processors, and so are assured of a consistent or a constant supply of quality produce. And so that's just a little short background on the entire aspect of this project and how it came about, and as to where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Murillo. Mr. Murillo, do you have any feedback as to the process with
Can you repeat? You were breaking up again. Hello, Silverio, are you hearing me? Any of the other participants hearing me?
Yes, we do hear you, Mr. Murillo.
Okay, great. So it's only Silverio we're not hearing.
Yeah, apparently looks like he's having some problems with his connection.
I hear you, and thanks for that background that you gave, Mr. Morero.
That's good. Okay, I see Silverio has typed his comments. He said, "Can you share some comments on the process between the BMDC and the beekeepers in the north?" All right. At the conclusion of the project, there was this idea to do a pilot. We were looking at we had two concepts. One was Murray Sharp, and one was Belize Marketing and Development Corporation, with some beekeepers up in the Orange Walk district. Sorry. And just a few months ago, earlier this year, I think it was back in May, we had our first contract signed, which was between the Belize Marketing and Development Corporation and the Orange Walk Honey and the Orange Walk Beekeepers and Honey Producers Cooperative. It is a group of beekeepers who have always been providing or selling honey to BMDC, but there has always been the issue of side selling and of competition, where there is an instance where as a beekeeper, I sell about 75% of my honey to BMDC, but I sell the other 25% on the open market, and most likely at a price cheaper than what BMDC would be able to sell it for. And so there was what you would refer to there as an issue with side selling and with competition. And BMDC took that into consideration, along with the fact that they were also looking for certain quality conditions and criteria. And so they did a contract back in May, where now the beekeepers have agreed to the fact that they would sell all their honey except for what would be considered their own household use, which they would then be able to keep for themselves. But that all the other honey that they produce, they would sell and distribute through the Belize Marketing and Development Corporation. And so that has been the first contract. We have not heard of any negative issues so far. At least no feedback has reached us, either from the cooperative or from BMDC. There are, of course, some challenges internal to the cooperative, but those can be ironed out, and we believe that because it is a new application or a new issue, that there would be those what you can call teething problems. But we believe that with a subsequent honey season, that those will be ironed out, and that eventually, that it will be a system that ultimately we can use as a model for other industries when it comes to contract farming. The idea during the project phase was that, given that BMDC is a quasi government, it is a statutory body, but it is still government related. That there may not necessarily be so much of a trust issue with the farmers as there would be with another private company or private corporation. Of course, there still was. I believe Silverio knows all too well what has been the history of, well, it is BMDC now, but what has been the history of the marketing board and its relationship with farmers and producers, and so there were still some issues. But slowly but surely, we have seen that in having the beekeepers and that corporation do a contract, that it has been so far mutually beneficial. BMDC is assured of its supply of honey, and the farmers are assured of a market. They need not have to be out there running around trying to find where they will sell their produce. There is an assured market at an agreed upon price for an established quality. And so it has been, we believe so far, relatively positive. And as a matter of fact, if I may add, I know that BMDC again has expressed some interest in doing or in making contractual arrangements with some onion producers, with another cooperative that is located in the Belize district, in the Bomba Mascal area. I know that they were buying onions from that particular cooperative, but maybe for the next season, they are also looking at entering into a contractual arrangement with that particular cooperative. Of course, at the Department of Cooperatives, we will keep monitoring that situation. Just to, as we maintain that regulatory oversight of cooperatives, we need to know what contracts they engage in, and what will be the financial implications of those contracts within their own cooperative. And so we will be monitoring that situation. We are hoping that it indeed comes about, and we are hoping that we can then use that as another model within the crops sector of agriculture. Silverio, are you back?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can, a little bit better now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Murillo, for that feedback. I don't know if there's any other questions from the floor. I suppose there are not. So
Yes, I have one more.
okay, go ahead.
It's Roberto.
Go right ahead.
My question, and it's like a question and concern. I know sometimes, for example, when you do a contract, for example, I have experience whenever it comes at my workplace. I'm the farm manager, and do contracts with the Mennonites because we produce grains.
Yes.
But sometimes the contract would be the crop is still not harvested yet, and we have already made arrangements. And sometimes the Mennonites would we would make a contract arrangement that they would buy, let's say, the pound of corn for, I don't know, 20 cents. And then when the actual price, whenever we harvest and we sell, the price goes up. And then that's my concern, because the farmer taking to a level, going down to the level of a small farmer. If we do a contract based on the price, and then whenever we harvest based on our cost of production, all our inputs, and then it wouldn't really tally to the price that we agreed, that the farmer would be losing. How that would be managed?
I think I mentioned in the presentation a matter of advantages and disadvantages, and that is indeed one of the disadvantages, in that when you sign the contract, the price may be at a certain level, but by the time you harvest or by the time you have your product ready, that price moves from here to here, and you have already agreed in your contract, and some just honoring the contract. However, the reverse can happen. Maybe at the time of the contract you agreed with the price there, but by the time you go to market, the price is here. That buyer is still obligated to pay you at this level. There was a school of thought when it comes to that regard, to not necessarily write a contract with a set price, but to write that contract to say that you will be within a certain percentage of whatever is the market value at the time of the purchase, or at the time the monies are supposed to exchange hands, to try and compensate for that particular concern. So you would say, that your buyer would say, I will pay you, maybe if it's on a per pound basis, maybe your buyer will say, I will pay you 5 cents less per pound of what is the market price. Right? Or it could be the reverse. I will pay you 5 cents more than than what is the lowest. So those kind of clauses do make it a little bit trickier to write the contract, but they can be included, and it is an issue that as producers and as drafters of those contracts, that need to be taken into consideration.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I suggest that you all visit the online FAO Resource Center. Look at the documentation that they have there. Some of it might be long, it might be lengthy, it might contain a lot of legal jargon, but many of the summary documents are a little bit easier to understand, and they will explain some of the processes and some of the procedures.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Murillo. I don't know if you're able to hear me, or if I'm breaking up. I get the signal that my connection is somewhat low.
I'm hearing you a lot better at the moment.
Okay. All right. So let me just say thank you, Mr. Murillo. Thank you very much.
And I would like to conclude by just saying thanks for the invitation, and thank you all for listening to me. I find this a particularly interesting topic. I do suggest, again, that you visit the FAO Resource Center, look at the documentation, look at the materials here. It will give you a lot more information than I was able to summarize here in this short time. If you have any other questions or comments which you would like some clarification on, feel free to reach out to me. You can send those comments, questions to Silverio. Of course, he can get them to me, and I will try to provide as quick a response as possible. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you
was a
too.
pleasure. Thanks, Mr. Murillo.
Thank you all too.